Welcome everybody to today's conversation. We're here to chat with Alison Bukowski, our favorite in-house customer advocacy champion. Alison is a top 25 customer marketing advocacy influencer. So she has over 20 years of experience in marketing, customer success, and sales operations, which gives her a lot of insight into what's really driving organizational growth, which is the customer voice. In case you guys aren't familiar with PeerSpot, we're the premier buying intelligence platform where tech buyers go to read in-depth product reviews, which provide customer advocacy teams with instant reviews. The goal of today's talk is to hear some advice from Alison on making the most out of peer reviews. But we also want to talk with you guys. So we want your feedback, hear about any roadblocks you're running into. We want everybody to walk away from the session with more answers and more information than they came with. So let's make it collaborative. Let's help each other. Let's talk. We can chat in the chat. You can also submit through the Q&A box, but we'd love to see just kind of a conversation going through the chat if possible, and we'll address comments as they come in. So that's housekeeping. I'm going to hand it over to Alison to start chatting.
Sounds good. Thanks so much, Val. Hey, everybody. It's so nice to see familiar names and then also new names. That's what makes these sessions so great. As Val said, please go ahead and use the chat. So we're here. I want to have a conversation, not necessarily a presentation, even though you'll have plenty of clip art and random memes that I'll deliver through today's session. And we're here to talk about customer reviews, peer reviews, whatever name you want to put on them. I would like to go ahead actually and just start using the chat right away so that, and also if you get tired of listening to me, asking questions to everyone, where do you think you are right now? I'm curious how many of you feel that you have a review strategy. Are you just sort of doing reviews off the side of your desk? Kind of where are you at? So you guys can feel free to use the chat. And we'll get started here talking about, I'd like to divide this into two sections if we could. First, we'll talk about, the importance of peer reviews, where we're at today, and maybe some of the missteps. And then I want to pivot and talk very tactically, how do we go from here and start building out something that's a bit more strategic. So let's go ahead and jump to the next slide. And let's take care of just a kind of basic housekeeping. We all know this, but in case any of you need some, food for thought, or you need something to toss into a slide deck, they're important. We're not going to get away from them. Customer reviews and peer reviews are becoming very quickly the #1 mechanism that buyers are using to make decisions. And you can see the numbers here, but what I think is really interesting is that buyers are using reviews at the beginning, so at the top of the funnel, and they're using it at the bottom of the funnel. It's almost the start and the finish when we talk about, the buying cycle. And as we move on to the next slide, which is, yes, of course, this is a little tongue in cheek, but I'd love for you guys to just sort of use an emoji, whatever. Is this resonating with you? And a lot of the content today, I actually hope that you'll screenshot, you'll steal something, or you'll come away with some tidbits that you can use in a deck of your own to help sort of justify, why do we have to pivot from being tactical to being strategic? Reviews have been part of my world for almost 20 years. Started in the GPI world. We've grown a lot, and there are a lot more options out there, and all of them have a place, and we'll talk about that. But a lot of times we just sort of get, hey, we need these reviews. Isn't this awesome? Let's do this. The more reviews we have, the better. It's a quantity over quality thing. And then what do? We spray and pray, and we blast out an email to everyone, and we do that in a very, at least in my experience, tight time frame. And then we kind of let it go. And then we come back to it again. So I'm curious, are there heads nodding out there? Is this a similar experience for some of you? Taking a look at, you maybe currently are a little bit reactive rather than being proactive. Okay, and I'd also like to, I mean, we've got the beauty of the poll feature. So let's go ahead and I'd like to ask a question when it comes to decisions of the group. So if you could, we'll put the poll here up on the screen and then think about your role today and let me know who's making the decision right now. Leave this up for just a moment. And that also gives me an excuse to look over to the chat here. Okay. Yes, ad hoc campaigns for reviews. Love it, Terry, switching. That's what we want to talk about, switching from reactive. Let's get strategic. Wonderful. Okay, let's go ahead and close the poll here. And Val, I think that we can have those results real time. Okay.
Us marketing folks are
This is
very demanding.
actually, I'm a bit surprised, but in a very pleasantly surprised to see that the split. And I'm noticing that C-suite isn't there. So I'll have another question for you guys in a second. So we'll close that and let's move on. And I see a couple of comments here about competing with other things. So the next slide is where I'm going to become very unpopular. And hopefully that dissipates over the course of the next 20, 30 minutes. But where are we making these missteps? And I'm putting this up here, not because I am not speaking down to anyone here. We're in this together, and I am guilty, probably more than anyone else, of sometimes falling on some of these things. I tried to sort of distill it down to some buckets. And a lot of times it's us. It is on us. Now we are not wholly responsible, right, for the failure of not being able to be strategic with reviews. But these are the things where, and I'm curious if there's one here that really jumps out, because I want to walk through these, not because we don't know, but because we need reminders. I think if we're going to solve a problem, we have to be honest with ourselves and we have to identify where are the missteps, what does that look like, so that we can move forward. And that's what I want to do now. And also so that you can take some of this. And if we actually, let's go ahead and go to the next slide and do a little bit of a deeper dive and take this reminder. And maybe you don't need the reminder, but perhaps somebody else in the org needs the reminder. So first, just why do we do this? Let's go ahead and start very basic. Why does it matter? It is not just about checking the box, right? There's reasons why we do reviews. And you can see a whole bunch of them here. You can pick whichever internal stakeholder this might resonate the most with and make sure that you're calling those out. This isn't just something we have to do because we have to do it. And I think on the right-hand side here, obviously things like competitive intelligence, especially if product management is driving, because I saw that marketing and product are kind of split on who's just, driving the review strategy, obviously very important. But, things when you're talking to the C-suite, things like investor confidence, brand reputation, validation of your organization, all of that, you want to make sure that you're picking out the right things. Right? We've talked a lot about speaking the language of your internal stakeholders. And then, of course, on the right-hand side, there is this sort of triangular relationship, these things going together when it comes to content. Reviews are delivering content. That's creating stronger campaigns and marketing materials. That's increasing prospect engagement and so on and so forth. It goes round and round in a cycle. So we'll move on. Oh, yeah.
Really quickly. I was
Please.
just curious if you guys feel like you're getting a seat at all the tables. I know you get brought in for certain things, but for like demand gen, I don't feel like you guys are getting a seat at the table. Product marketing, maybe. AR, probably. I'm just curious how that feels.
That's a great question. And again, feel free to use the chat there. Do you feel like you are connected? Another way of maybe asking the question, are you connected to the various stakeholders where you feel like you can make a case. That's the first thing. Do you have the stage to make a case for why reviews are more than just a reactive measure? And then actually that segues as we go into the next point here, as we talk about, I won't spend much time on this other than I like the comic, but one thing that I do want to call out here, you hear, everyone knows, right, what happens when we assume, make an ass out of you and me. We get caught in that trap. And the one thing I want to call out from these bullets is what we think customers understand about reviews and their value. So the last slide, we're talking about the value of the review internally, but what about the value to your customers? Do they really understand? My guess is they do not understand why this matters. If you're going about with just an email, hey, isn't this great? Do this, click on this link, you know, maybe you get a gift card, whatever. Go ahead and do this. They need more. They need to understand why this matters. And if you have strong relationships with customers, chances are they're willing to do it, but let them know why it matters and guide them. Take them as far as you can. Is it a heavier lift? Yes, it is. So when we're talking about that value, and I'll actually talk about this on the second half of the deck as well, when we talk a little bit about customer journey, but make sure that they understand this is important to you in your role, because that feedback allows you to keep growing your advocacy program or to keep, you know, having resources for different customer engagement opportunities. Why does the review matter? Because it goes to the product team. If you're really strategic about this, you should be sharing this feedback. So we'll talk a little bit more about that as well, so you can help customers understand the value. Next slide, please. So two things on this. I put the 3 C's together: the customer journey, communication, and creativity. And answer in your head, answer in the chat. I'll come back to this again. The question of where's your customer journey? I will ask about how many of you have a journey map. And then the other part of that question is how many of you participate and have involvement with that journey map. So we'll come back to that. And I think that the cartoon here, this is really sort of representative of the issue. So great, somebody engaged, and then you're just hitting them up at a random time. They haven't heard from you before. They don't understand what you're wanting. That goes back to the previous slide and speaks to the communication and the messaging, right? And then also creativity. I put these here again, not because you don't know about these various things, but it is worth sort of the reminder in grabbing them and kind of use them as a checkbox. Outside of the email blast, how else can you gather these reviews? And how can you do this in a more creative and effective way? Are you using things like events? You know, are you gathering reviews at a cab? Are you gathering reviews at a customer conference, a user conference? What about, you know, leveraging reference conversations and then segueing that into an opportunity for a review? Or what about just opportunities for gratitude? And what I mean by that is actually the review being the secondary purpose behind just regularly kind of scheduled opportunities to reach out to customers. So we'll move to the next slide, but I want to also just pause here. This is the beauty of, and actually, why don't we go ahead and I want to ask another question of you all having to do with numbers of reviews. So we'll put that poll up, and that will allow me to also catch up here on the chat.
So I think most people are agreeing with everything you're saying.
Well, and I'm looking here. I will hold me accountable that we talk about same customer reviews in multiple sites, because I will speak to that in a little bit. Okay, and internal partners not understanding the value. So we'll talk about that as well. Okay. So I am very curious with this question, and hopefully you've all had an opportunity here. Do you have a quota? I think you all know what I mean by that, but are you basically told you need to secure X number of reviews here, and you need to have a total of this many reviews over here? And we'll close that one up and let's take a look. Interesting that it's split. I expect, this is why I love doing the polls. I would have expected 70-30, 70 on the yes and 30 on the no. So food for thought again in the chat, so you guys can exchange with each other. For those of you that are, given a quota, where is that coming from? Where is that originating from? And those who don't have a quota, how do you decide? Like, how do you know that you're doing enough? And I would love to talk to anyone after this as well about that particular question.
Is the quota like a KPI for measurement for success, or is the quota related to something else?
A lot of the CMA professionals that I talk to have a quota tied to their KPIs. So we want to have X number of peer reviews. And sometimes there's not a number, but it's still very much tied to KPIs, which is another reason I think this is an important conversation topic, because if you're being asked to deliver essentially and measured on that success, reactive is never, going to work. And that's sort of what I'm getting at here. We're constantly in this like ready, fire, aim mentality when it comes to customer reviews, or most of the folks that I talk to, we have that. And a lot of times it comes from up here, somebody not in marketing or product management, right? That was the first question, who owns it? But then the quota is coming from somewhere else. And that's tricky, and that doesn't make a lot of sense to me. I already kind of talked about the chaos of we put tons of effort once a year or twice a year. Customers feel the burnout. So that was being, discussed here in the chat, because we're hitting them up with requests. And then my favorite one is that we tend to make the mistake of putting all of our review eggs into one review basket. And that just isn't going to work anymore with the importance of customer reviews in the buyer's journey and the buying cycle, and two, with the presence of different sites, and making sure that you have a place so that you have a seat at the table out there in the in the internet world where people are looking and doing making buying decisions without even talking to sales. So let's go ahead and go to the next slide here. And I'm also just taking a look here. Okay, yep, the analyst, I'm very familiar with the frenzy around the analyst cycle each year. Oh, okay, so not the number, if I'm understanding you correctly, Christina, not the number, but you actually have measurement around the review quality, like what rating you're getting.
Yeah. Wow.
Yep, and that one's, we have some time. Let's come back to that one.
We should talk about, or I would love to talk about, I shouldn't say we should. I'm totally curious. You had mentioned earlier, you had a bullet point on negative reviews. So
yep,
maybe we talk to that a little bit. I don't know.
Yes, and we will in just a second, because I want to talk about how we sort of brush them under the rug and we don't address them, and they don't get the airplay that they really, deserve. And then I'm just looking, rating manager to drive that. Yep. Okay. So where do we go? Everything thus far that we've been talking about has been sort of setting the stage for why does it matter? This matters, right? Brand recognition drives revenue, presence within the marketplace, all of that good stuff. So you guys can take any of that. Maybe you already have it in a deck, but if you don't, I highly recommend that you have one called your review deck that you can pull out from time to time if you need to, and if you need to kind of help push what we're about to talk about right now. I happen to I like this quote because I'm a very tactical person by nature. I'm a get it done. No matter what, no matter where I am in my career, I'm still the roll up the sleeves and let's just, move things along. But if we aren't doing that with a North Star or a strategy behind it, we might as well just give up before we get started. So my suggestion is, as we move into the next couple of slides here, is that we look at this more strategically. I call it a diversified review strategy. It's the best term that I can come up with to encapsulate what I'm trying to say. And what does it mean if you have a truly diversified review strategy? It actually allows you to create an experience around the customer review process so that both your customers, and I mean your internal customers and your external customers, have a positive experience. Why do I think there's a number of reasons why I think we should do this, but most of us, I believe, on the call here today are customer advocacy professionals, or we have a place within customer marketing. Relationships matter to us. The customer experience matters to us. If it didn't, we wouldn't be in the role that we are in. So I find it very frustrating that this piece of that customer experience doesn't get that same attention and personalized experience. So what do we need to do to make that happen? We need to work with different platforms, and one size does not fit all, nor does it fit all customers. So I want to talk a little bit about that. You have to look at your customers and the customer data. Where are they geographically? What role are they in? What level of expertise, and also their personality? We all do a lot to make sure that we understand personas within customer advocacy. That matters a lot when it comes to soliciting customer reviews, as does the experience, right? The timing matters, how we're communicating, and what medium we're using to request that review. We can look at relationships. Who should really be leading charge on communication? I'll talk about a little bit more about that. And then also the customer journey. That's something that I'm getting really passionate about, kind of my new sort of pet project, if you will. So I'd like to talk a little bit about that as well. But I just want to pause for a second. Are there any questions or comments for me right now before I kind of dive into how do we have the building blocks to build the strategy? Let's look over at the chat.
So Terry had a comment, I think the last chat in there about quality over quantity being a measurement.
Mm-hmm.
So I don't know if we can address that as far as, is there a way to ensure you get more quality out of a review, and how you do that? We can talk about that later, but that kind of stood out to me.
I think so, absolutely. And I think that comes around, I'm going to talk a little bit about diversifying our customer base and which reviews are appropriate for which customers. And I agree with you 100%, Terry. I'm a quality over quantity person as well. So let's go ahead and dive in. We can go to the next slide here, although hold on, let me see. Oh, there is a question here. Suggestions in order to recruit tier 1. Okay, and let me know if I'm understanding that correctly. You're asking basically, how do you go after the big guys, the big brands that you want to see reflected within customer reviews? If I have that correct, then I will circle back to that when we kind of talk about, diversifying the customer base. So just like on the front end of these slides, where do we misstep? Well, where do we fix it? And what can we do to get it right? I was an English major, so peer review was a thing in a much different way before peer review became a big part of my career. And it was all about, you know, being comfortable enough and vulnerable enough to share information. And that's really what a customer review or a peer review is. It's someone who's willing to raise their hand and share their experience. So this is the snapshot slide. So if you're looking for those kind of bullets, that might be useful. And then same thing, I want to dive into some of these, but we'll talk about the journey map. We'll talk about a little bit about the process. And then it sounds like I want to spend a fair amount of time talking about the right platforms for the right customers. And that's how we get, in my opinion, at the heavy hitters, certain customers with certain brands or logos. And then let's also talk about another thing that has come up. How do we handle the feedback? Okay. So actually, I think I would like to ask one more question of the group here, if I could, around what you're facing with your biggest challenges. So Val, do we have that one more poll question?
Yeah,
Let's put that one up. So take a look at this. I know I'm only asking you to pick one here, but that'll allow me to focus, but then also you guys can chat about this. And then if we have some time at the end, which I think we will, we can come back and talk about it. Let's leave it up there for just a little bit longer. Okay, let's take a look. Okay. Not shocking at all to see that there's just not a response. Follow-up question for the group on that one. Those who answered that, are you, and it's okay, you're in a safe space here, are you kind of the blast email, that's where you're at right now, and you're sending things out and you're not getting a lot of return on investment, if you will, for sending those emails? So for those who answered that way, and then I would like to actually talk about the internal partners not doing their part, even though it's not as much of the group here. And then we'll certainly, let's talk about strategy right now. There we go. The customer, thank you, Michelle. Okay, let's go to the next slide because I can't wait to talk about customer journey. It's so simple. There's not a lot on this slide. So sorry, you're gonna have to listen to me just talk, but just like smile face or frowny face, thumbs up, thumbs down. How many of you have a customer journey map? Not that you're on it, just do you have one? Because I'm always surprised and don't feel like embarrassed. A lot of you don't. And that's okay. Okay, so good. Michelle's got one. Anybody else? Do you all have one then? Can I assume that? Even though I just told you how you shouldn't use the word assume. All right, how about this? How many of you in your role have a seat at the table? How many of you have advocacy on the journey map?
Thumbs down.
Okay.
Ooh.
All right. We just have to. This isn't even just for customer reviews. This is something that I would love to see. Oh, yay, there's one. Yeah, there's one. I love it. We need to have the place. And I would, and Lynn, I'd love some feedback too from you on this because you do have a seat at the table, how beneficial that has been. In my last org was the first time that I got to have a seat at the table. I'm going to keep it focused on reviews because that's what we're talking about right now, but it's so much more than that because advocacy is not a one and done kind of thing. Customer advocacy is happening throughout the entire customer journey. There are no rules anymore. We're not old school where it's like, well, a customer has to be deployed for 6 months and they have to be having success with the solution. No, they don't. You can find an advocate anywhere. along the way. But here on this slide are some places where you should have a spot where reviews are concerned. So instead of the whole spray and pray approach with emails, are you soliciting reviews after NPS goes out for the promoters? And you guys can use the chat too, thumbs up, thumbs down, or just type like what you are using it for. Are you doing it with NPS? Are you doing it after a successful deployment? Are you asking for a review after a renewal? And are you using your customer events to garner more reviews? These are 4 easier ones, and I realize easy is kind of a relative term. However, if you're able to figure out who owns that journey map, it's usually customer success, but not always. Force your way in and find a way to work with those internal partners. And you can even automate some of this. So again, we'll move through the rest, but we can come back. And I'm happy to talk about, any of this. And I think, oh, thank you, Mauro. That's a really good point about visibility into some of these things. That is where I think getting a seat at the table for the customer journey map, it'll kind of organically happen because the journey map does cover the customer, or it should be covering the entire customer experience. You'll have an opportunity to at least see it and to know. It was very eye-opening for me. I had no idea. I really didn't. I had no idea where our SEs were being engaged or our support team and where we had some opportunities. Support's another one that should be on here, but my cheap Google image didn't have another pin. So that would be one that we could also add to the mix here.
I have a question about that. So I don't want to talk about a way around this because I know you guys want to have a seat at the table, but I'm curious if, I think in some organizations I've worked in, sales has had to include it in part of their conversation. So if you're talking post-deployment, post-renewal, as they're having these conversations with the customers, oh, hey, by the way, I don't know if that's a solution. It's probably not easy to implement, but I'm just curious if that's something people are doing too, as a backup.
And you guys let us know if you're doing that. And I think you can, right? And I would say leverage where you have solid relationships. This might be a stretch goal to get to the journey map, but let's say you have a really good relationship, with CSMs, and maybe that's a way that you can get at NPS, or maybe with sales, and that's how you can, even if you can, so there's 4 things here. If you can do one of them, well, you're 25% better than you were, yesterday. So I recommend taking a look at some of those opportunities. Let's go ahead to the next slide. So, and again, this is, what do I call these when I'm at conferences? Like the picture slides.
Burger slide.
It's the one where I see people kind of like, oh yeah, that's good. Let me capture that. And you should, because why should you have to like reinvent the wheel here? But the point is that customer reviews are not just your job, or not just product's job. For those who said that product owns it and maybe you support it, it's a team sport, and it's everywhere across the organization. And as you start to think more strategically, and I know there are probably some of you, and actually if you want to just call me out and say, that's awesome, Alison, and you're just frustrated because I'm making it sound like, yeah, let's get everybody on board. It's not easy, it's hard, but it does pay off. And these are just a couple of examples of where you might be able to kind of have those points of responsibility. And you'll notice here that, customer advocacy and customer marketing, yep, we're okay with that. We'll own it. That's fine. And you'll notice the number of bullets under our bucket, yeah, that it's most of them, right? So sometimes when you can show everything that you're doing, it makes it a little easier to tell sales and CS, yeah, but if you want all these benefits, which we talked about at the front end of our discussion today, I do need you to play your part. And here's how you play your part. Why is this also incredibly important? Because as you start to measure, and anything that has a strategy behind it, or even if you're only halfway there, data, data, data. You know, as CMA professionals, we're no longer allowed to just be kind of the great big hug. Like we make customers happy. We do, but we also have to justify our existence. And by tracking some of this, it also does give you a little ammunition to sort of showcase, look at, we're knocking it out of the park with the CS team when we partner and we're getting reviews. Sales, meh, not so much. So if you can sort of identify the team members and the responsibilities, and then if you can take it a step further, that is extremely helpful. And again, these are not things that I think you're going to go back and by next week, you're going to have all of this in place, but you know your orgs and you know your role and what you have available to you. So this does allow you to kind of pick and choose. I'm just looking over at the chat here for a second. Yes. So Terry had mentioned the in-app request, and that is a really good idea. That as well as automation, wherever you can get it. And I have a couple of other ideas for that as well. So why don't we go ahead and move to the next slide. I apologize in advance. PowerPoint is not my strong suit. So this is not a very good graphic, but I think you'll get where I'm going with this. So I talked about that we have to stop putting all of our eggs into one review basket. That's the right platform. That's that part of it. And then there was a lot of conversation around the right people. And actually, Val, would you be so kind? Could you flip very quickly to the next slide for me? And then flip back. Okay, thank you. I just wanted to see what I was following up with so I knew how long to dwell on this. And I think it might be for a little bit. So first, let's talk about the right platforms. Obviously, I am partial to PeerSpot for a whole host of reasons, but there are also other review platforms that are out there. And no one should be so naive as to think that we won't have our hands on multiple platforms, and we should. I could not sit here and talk about a diversified review strategy if I didn't talk about diversifying the platforms that you're engaging with. But I do encourage you to do your homework on the different platforms and what they bring to the table, because there's different things that they all bring, and strengths and weaknesses. But when you look at that, it helps you also decide how you want to start looking at your customer base. So a very simple exercise, and some of you have probably done this, take a look at platforms, take a look at some of, what is the value that they're delivering. What's not here, but you should do, is compare it to your goals, your KPIs. If, for example, if you are responsible for content, I'd put you in the PeerSpot bucket all day long. If you're responsible, for some other things around like quantity and presence, there's some other options that are out there. So take a look at that. But ultimately, at the end of the day, you really do kind of want to you want to play with as many as you can. Resources aren't unlimited, but why? Because that makes sure that you're showing up. And that is a big part of it. So then let's talk about our customers. How many of you have a formal customer advocacy program, like a high touch advocacy program with X number of advocates? You can just thumbs up, thumbs down, or put a comment in the chat for me. Okay, working on it. Okay, Terry, you guys do good. Yep. Okay. Then my follow-up question to that is, for those of you who have an advocacy program, do you consider it a high touch program? Like you're engaging with those customers more than you would say those that are not in your program? I would assume the answer is yes, but okay. Awesome. Get in there. Good. Okay, cool. So the reason I bring that up is because earlier we were talking about kind of we email blast, and we don't necessarily look at the data, and we don't take our customers and break them into categories. I'm curious, and you can do this in a variety of different ways, but I'll start with just a few examples to give you some food for thought. Geography, that's a really nice, easy one. You should be able to just export your customers based on their location and then figure out, okay, who's where. Certain review platforms play well in different geographies. Happy to, again, if we have some time, I'm happy to go into that or talk about that offline. But there are certain geographies and cultures and customs, they're a better fit. I've worked with a lot of customers in the APAC region, and quick, succinct, answering a couple of questions, that is preference there. Then there are others where not necessarily. So that's one way you can slice and dice. Advocates, that's another way that you can look at it, because chances are if you have an advocacy program and you have a strong base of advocates, they're already engaged with you. They're willing to work with you. I would definitely lean those customers into a bucket with a platform that perhaps is a little more hands-on. It's more content driven, right? That's what you're going to want to look at, because they love you. They will talk and talk and talk and talk and share their story, and you can capture a lot of information, which drives really solid marketing content. Another thing that you can look at is also by persona. If you've gotten to the place within your advocacy program where you've started to break things down by persona, that's a nice indicator as well. If you haven't, done that, you can look at role, right? Certain reviews are going to focus on different things. There may be some more strategic level questions. Well, obviously you're not going to put the engineers on those. So just kind of start thinking about, and then there was the question about the brands, right? Christina, you had asked, so I didn't forget. I would look at advocates first, and I don't know how many of your dream brands are in your advocacy program, but I'm hoping this is sort of answering your question when I talk about how do you not only diversify where your presence is, but how do you diversify your entire customer base and start assigning them to maybe a particular platform or a particular way that you're communicating or soliciting reviews. The big brands, if they're in a cab, that's where I would get them. That's where I would get those reviews, because a lot of times those are who you're going after for a true customer advisory board. And then also there were, and I apologize, I don't remember who made the comment about we're hitting multiple customers with multiple requests. Don't. I mean, if you can help it, don't. And if you start diversifying that customer base, your chances of doing that are a lot lighter. And it also gives you a lot more control about who you can, like, okay, sales, like, here's this, and we're going to go about it this way. And you can start segmenting out. And it's really just a matter of an exercise of kind of like customer lists at the end of the day. Does that help? I spent a lot of time just speaking, I know, on one slide that's like a don't do that PowerPoint faux pas, but I wanted to try to kind of get at some of those questions and hope, okay, good. So yeah, Christina, if you, I hope, did that sort of help answer your question? And if not, I want to make sure that I go a little bit deeper. Okay, in the interim, let's go ahead and move on to the next slide. So, and if you read my bio, I'm an animal person. So sorry, there's not a slide deck that doesn't have puppies. But this is around kind of reacting and sharing the feedback. And how do we, take that? Because this is back when we were talking about, well, how do we show the value to customers, right? Well, this is one way that you show the value. Let me also touch on those negative reviews. And maybe I blasted past it and it was on another slide because I swear I had a bullet about negative reviews, but please do not just let those sit there. You know, like, come on, we're better than that. When something comes in and it's a critical review, take those right away and make sure that you're routing those to the appropriate place within the organization. Why does it matter? Well, one, you have a chance to step up and potentially stop churn, right? So a lot of us, you know, if you're working with CS and you're trying to help with renewals and things like that, it's amazing how meaningful it is. And I've had customers who were passives or detractors, and then they left reviews that weren't so glowing. But then when we came back and we actually had a discussion, and sometimes it means that, yeah, you got to put like your, you know, somebody higher up in the org, they have to send a message or they have to have a conversation, but please don't let those die on the vine. Also, do not let positive reviews just sit there and assume that, oh, well, they're happy, that customer's happy, great, we don't have to do anything. Take the time to let them know that, hey, got the review. If you know who it was, right? We don't always know, but if you do, got this. This was really helpful. Here's the 4 different ways that we're going to take this. And here are some, on this slide here, some ways that you can use that. Product focus groups, huge. This is another reason to kind of diversify your base, but there's learning opportunities that come out of it, especially if product management is owning reviews or if you're supporting them very strongly. I look to my review and my reviewers to put together some really amazing product focus groups. And then you know, how many birds? Like 4 birds, 1 stone. You've got a review, you've got valuable product insight. Now you're helping your product team. You have a focus group. It's driving, you know, helping with the roadmap. Reviews are not one and done. And that's another way that we can be strategic, is continuing to use those for more opportunities. Customer reviews. I don't know how many of you have newsletters that you send out, or maybe you do webinars or something like that. One, this is, okay, little secret, maybe this makes me sound lazy, but featuring a customer review is a nice way to fill some content in a newsletter, and it can be a good and bad. You want to talk about building some rapport and some authenticity with your customers, share something that came in. But then of course, how did you go about, you know, fixing it? But, you know, that's what makes us human. So there's that piece of it. And then also accountability. And I know we come back to that, and I talked earlier about it being a team sport. But if you're going to go through the effort of sharing the feedback and owning this process, do certain things like have a governance council. If it's not something that you have, set SLAs with your internal partners. We talked about the journey map process, but this is just sort of a summary of some things that you can, you know, hopefully maybe grab one of them and see if you can make some progress on that particular item. Let me pause. I saw a question.
Lynn actually came in with a good comment about, do you show, when you're talking to your customers, do you tell them about all the review site options they have, or do you point them in a specific direction depending on the scenario? Like, how do you help them choose?
It's a good question. I point them in a particular direction, because if you're going through the exercise of kind of deciding where customers might be a good fit, and I'm happy to help anyone with how do you do that? How do you kind of look at the different platforms and then look at the customers? And it becomes pretty simple exercise when you get the hang of it, like, oh, okay, they should go over here. They should go to that platform. And when you make those decisions, the reason I do that, a couple of things. One, there's obviously a reason, you know, that I want them to go to that. That I don't tell a customer, like, oh, well, you know, you're, you know, based on your role, I think you should go there. I'm not going to share that with a customer. But also from just a customer experience perspective, I want this easy. And if it's nice, choices are nice, but they can also be overwhelming. So I think that you need to keep your asks clean, simple, and it doesn't mean that you can't ask them to do 2 reviews, but I would say maybe 2 a year, right? Like don't hit them up with five requests for 5, different platforms. Once or twice a year, and make sure when you're communicating, let them know why. Let them know why you want it. Don't send an email that just says like, we're so glad you're our customer. Would love to have your feedback. Click here. This doesn't really tell me much, but if you told me, we're really excited that you're an advocate and you've already shared so much amazing information as a reference for us, we'd like for you to share that information more broadly. And oh, by the way, then we might be able to take that content and use it as a reference. And then we're not necessarily needing you to get on the phone so many times. Remember, always push it back. It's just a tweak to the messaging and it makes a big difference. And you can use that messaging for multiple customers, but it sure feels a lot more personal. So does that help, Lynn, as far as, why I make the choice for them?
I mean, I
Both
think
for
it's a
their
really
benefit
good
and mine.
point. I think all of us in all of our different roles know that giving them one call to action is probably better than multiple anyway. So yeah, it totally resonates with me. You just got to point them in the right direction.
Yep. And also make sure that you're, do you hate it when that happens? Like it was there and then it went, oh, that you're giving instructions, that you're very clear. Remember, take them as far as you can. There are certain review sites that have requirements. Like with GPI, like you have to have a link, LinkedIn profile, or you have to have a login. Make sure they know that, because otherwise they're going to get in there and get frustrated, and then they're done, not coming back in. So thank you for the question about PeerSpot. Since it was asked, I am obligated, of course, to answer it. So I was a customer of PeerSpot's before I came over. I joined the team for a couple of reasons. One, I was ready in my career as a CMA professional to peek over the fence and kind of come over to the vendor side. But also because I was a customer, I did get to experience the value firsthand. Now, remember, I said I'm a quality over quantity person. And from my perspective, nobody delivers better quality. And the reason is a few things. The way that PeerSpot captures reviews, yes, you can go and you can leave a review and you can do it in the more traditional way, sure. But they also do interviews over the phone. And so where I think PeerSpot shines, I leveraged PeerSpot because I diversified as well. I leveraged PeerSpot for my advocates because I'm protective of those relationships. I love my customer advocates and I want them to have a top-notch experience. And so knowing that someone was actually just calling, asking questions, it was a conversation, it was easy, they didn't have to log in, they didn't have to type anything. I really liked that. But then even more, not more importantly, equally as important was the content that I got out of that experience, because I essentially, we're talking like 2,000 words for those that aren't familiar with PeerSpot reviews. 2,000 words, yeah, that's like a term paper. And it's also a great case study. So I have a case study, I had quotes, I was able to feed stuff to my demand gen team, to my other marketing partners, sales, materials, and things like that. So thank you for the question, Mauro. And that's why, essentially, and that's where I think that they shine, and they're an important piece of this overall review puzzle. All right, what else do we have here?
Terry makes a very interesting point, something I didn't really consider. Like, is this something you've thought about and considered, all the algorithms and the weighting? And I don't know why I never thought about that, but it's a really good point.
It is, and you're a genius, Terry. Have a list of questions. I didn't mention that, but ask questions, right? I mean, we're vendors, right? So you get to ask questions. You ultimately hold the purse strings. You get to make decisions. And that question right there is a fabulous question. And I encourage you to ask that. And what are they using? Let me see, Terry, if I'm trying to read fast and I'm talking, which is like
It makes me
chewing
want to go to our
bubblegum.
product team and say, okay, how are we doing this? It's complex.
Yeah. The timing out, that's a good question as well. You know, how long is a review good for? Another great question to ask is, may I use the content? It's about me. It's about my company. May I use it? You won't get the same answer from every platform, and sometimes that's okay, and sometimes it's not. So wonderful. I'm so glad. Okay. Hi, Judith. After finding PeerTalk, did you continue to create your own separate case studies? Both. I did both. And let me comment on that. So again, if you're not familiar, or if you want to see it, hit me up on LinkedIn or afterwards, and I can have somebody smarter than me show you the magic. But there's actually a button, like a case study button for PeerSpot customers, where it just click and it takes a review and it creates this beautiful like PDF, like with, you know, co-branded logos and all of that jazz. So I used those a lot to bulk up my library of content. And it gave sales more options and more choices, which of course made them really, really happy. I still pursued case studies, or customer stories, as I prefer to call them, with customers who hadn't left reviews. And then I had a third option where I took a PeerSpot review, and that's the nice thing. So a customer, let's say an advocate of mine, they took a call, they left an amazing review. I took a copy of that review, I read it, I found out like, okay, is there anything else I would want in a perfect world? And then I sent it to the customer and I said, hey, thank you so much. Here's your, you know, here's what was captured. We really appreciate it. I think this would be awesome if we could just add XYZ. They would say yes, they would sign off on it. And then I would basically take all of that and I would put in 10% of the effort, and I would have the exact case study that I wanted. So you have options. Look, another question here. Does that help, Judith? Let me know. Yeah, so question about if you're doing the diversification of the customer base and you have a customer that could fit into multiple buckets. Yeah, you absolutely, just don't ask them for the same, don't ask them in the same week to do two reviews. Kind of look at, I would say, look at your KPIs, look at how many customers you're pushing to the different review sites, and then let that sort of be your guide. And then set yourself up for leveraging that same customer for, you know, the next time around. Another really nice thing you can do if you want to help customers out, and again, I realize there's only so many hours in the day, so these are all just suggestions, but if they left a review on one platform and you're going to ask them to do it again a few months later, remind them of what they said the first time around. Here's what you said. Would you be willing to, you know, leave your feedback on this particular site? But here you go, in case you want to do a little copy paste exercise. Don't make them reinvent the wheel if they don't have to. Another question here. Oh, and Val, I think this is the last slide, which is why I kind of just abandoned to go to the.
There's your end slide.
Oh yeah, because Agatha Christie, and it's not a mystery anymore. So let me go back here to the questions. So Judith, not necessarily. And I'd be happy to talk about that. Obviously, knowing you as a customer. So no, not necessarily. And let's talk about it, because I have some ideas for that. As far as, like, she was asking about co-branding. Yep, and Terry brings up the point too about you know, awards and distinctions. And I think that that's another thing that can be factored into sort of your portfolio or your snapshot of different partners that you want to work with. You know, are those things important? And if they are, who does the best job with it, right? And what are you trying to achieve? Again, it's kind of comparing it to what your KPIs are and your goals, because that's how it should work, right? It should it should meet you where you're at and what you need to either drive the organization forward or you yourself, right? Your personal, your professional brand to drive that forward. Wonderful. Okay. I know we're at the top of the hour, so I always want to make sure I respect everybody's calendar. Please feel free to reach out to me. I do believe I sent a LinkedIn. If we weren't already connected, I think I tried to connect with you all earlier today. I knew you would be joining the call, so send me a message if you have questions, and we'll make sure to send some follow-up. And I have one last question for the group. I would love to do this as a two-part series. I've already put together a blog, so if you like to read, you can do that as well. Would you be interested in the second installment of this, which is going to get a little more into the weeds about how do you do it? Okay.
I think we're in.
All right. Let me survive a couple of big events that are coming up, and then I will start putting pen to paper and putting something together. And for those of you who might be at Customer XCon next week, I will see you then. Please come find me and say hello. And thank you guys. I really appreciate your time today.
Thanks, everybody.
Take care.